The title of this presentation is Video Games Narrative Evolution. But before we start, what I will try to depict to you is a massive generalization about video games landscape, and maybe I'll come quite strong with some statements. That's only because I would like to get, in the little time we have, to the core of the discussion. Indeed, what I will try to suggest is that video games are a narrative evolution. And to do so, I will start introducing the concept of ludic narrative, or shorter, ludonarrative. It's a concept that requires if games, especially video games, belong to the category of narrative tools. However, I have to confess that my research in the academic studies has revealed to be quite unsatisfying. As a matter of fact, the ludic field is dominated by narratology and ludology studies. These two academic approaches have unintentionally fallen in argument with each other about the fact that video games could or could not share a narratological structure. In this way, new technical terms, such as interactive fiction, were off the table even before they could touch its surface. But what's even more tiresome is that none of these studies is actually a science about video games. Furthermore, I find quite inconvenient that these studies are mostly dated back to the 80s and 90s, when the video games landscape was still unripe and immature. And last but not least, I found counterproductive that the idea of narrative they both share and compare video games to is strictly correlated to literature. And it's exemplary that they take the late 19th century's novel as their model. I find this approach questionable and, quoting, a misunderstanding of academic jargon that got clear in a paper from 2004. But that nonetheless left us orphans of a figure we could relate to. I find the storytelling studies approach, and what I mean with storytelling is Joseph Campbell's heritage, to be much more reliable. What storytelling studies do is to hypothesize that narrative is an archetypical concept hidden in the deep soul of humankind, and that this concept has been the same since Homer till today. Surely, different narrative media exist, diversifying the narrative tools. We have picture, cinema, theater, poetry, music, sculpture, literature. But, beyond these structures, those same concepts and goals persist. What I will try to persuade you about is that, among these media, a ludic narrative does exist. That we need to develop a specific theoretical study about it. That, despite its diffusion, it still has an unexpressed potential. And last, that the narrative experience that it provides to the audience has a persuasive power, peerless and unheard of. As Souvik Mukherjee suggests in the introduction to his book Video Games and Storytelling, it's plausible to think that since the dawn of time there was an opposition between epos, story, and ludos, game. They both are entertainment tools, but one is an extremely passive experience, while the other is an active one. The first is linked to logos, word, the second to pragma, action. However, we can already spot a correlation, since they are both tools of knowledge. The epos is a virtual travel headed towards revelation and transformation. Therefore, it's a tool for cognitive knowledge, and we could say that it answers to the question of how to be. On the other hand, pragma is a challenge to develop new skills, so it's a tool for competence knowledge, answering the question of how to do. Ludonarrative is nothing more than the crisis between these two. It's the narrator trusting his audience with sharing the responsibility for the development of the story. We became players when we choose to partake in telling a story, and we could define it as a learning to be by doing. But before we proceed, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. To conjecture about a co-op real-time narrative, it's ambiguous, if not paradoxical, even for the storytelling studies. John Truby said that revelation is the key point in the narrative journey, that the narrator's duty is not to track a path for unexplored territories, but instead, given a destination, to design the best path to get there and to better digest what is waiting for us. If he was right, then all of this would make no sense. Indeed, how can we guarantee meaning if the outcome depends on the audience's choice? The journey could be entertaining, but the unnecessity of the finale will instead make it meaningless. Storytelling is not just about emotions and entertaining. These are simply the means to reach our end. It's about meaning, purpose. So, is it possible for ludonarrative to preserve the narrative purpose? Let's find out. Oddly enough, we have to start with literature. The 60s saw the publication of the first game books. We are talking about novels, usually fantasy fiction, where, instead of following a monodirectional path, linear or not, the book acts as a river with emissaries. At the end of each chapter, the narrator demands from the reader, as an imposition, that he chooses between two or more paths. Each choice will lead into a different chapter in the book, forth and back, redesigning the hero's journey. There are mainly two models. One provides a univocal beginning and outcome. Therefore, the journey can change its length and conflict intensity, but the result will be the same. The other model offers multiple endings, both with happy or tragic outcomes. This way, the reader experiences two particular dynamics. First of all, the book reveals to be a polyhedral system, offering to be read again in different ways, following different journeys and therefore multiple narrative experiences. Secondly, the reader is promoted to assistant narrator, thus becoming partially responsible for the outcome. The tragic or happy ending will be the result of the choices he made during the reading. In 1975, we have the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons. D&D is an RPG role-playing game, and so who are the actors? There is a narrator, almighty creator of a virtual world. The audience enters this world as a player character, PC. The narrator invites him to join in an adventure, in which the PC will act within the boundaries of freedom that the narrator grants him, reacting to the environment and to the NPCs, not playable characters, all mastered by the narrator. The last actor is the odds of a dice roll, playing as a referee between the narrator and the PC. The concept of D&D, therefore, is a relationship. The narrator proposes and opposes to the PC, who will answer within his limited power and his fiercer willfulness. It's a game based on behaviorism and individuality. The clash of the two individualities and the behavior or misbehavior of both the contenders will shape the journey and the narrative world. This is the cultural context in which video games are born. In 1972, the first video game was released, Pong. When I said that narratology and ludology studies were dated, I meant that their assumptions were in a field only 10-20 years young, which is quite difficult to compare to what video games have become today. Indeed, what's the connection between that and this? Let's quickly have a look at how video game performs, and so in which attributes is similar to or different from other media. First of all, it's a video medium, therefore it answers to the rules of graphic arts, such as pictures, cinema, theater, and so on. Secondly, it's a temporal medium, such as cinema and music, but not literature nor pictures. Thirdly, it's virtual, therefore it differs from theater and any live experience, like literature and cinema do. Fourth, it's a medium of private usage, as opposed to cinema. Similar are, however, TV series and again books, and quite often music too. Lastly, it's a performance medium. It requires an effort to be accomplished, and maybe only literature shares this peculiarity. Although these attributes have been constant since the beginning until now, there are more qualities that video games acquired after almost 50 years, qualities that we need to acknowledge for a better understanding and critical analysis of the medium. As John Lasseter said, technology inspires art and art challenges technology. This is true not only for the studios in Emeryville, but for every product in CGI. In fact, like in 3D animation, video games evolve along with technology's progressions. Modern video games can operate in a virtual map of 130 square kilometers. It's about a virtual world almost as big as the state of Louisiana, bigger than Switzerland and Austria altogether. It's a vast virtual world in which the player can run freely, from a corner to the other. Talking about extension, a video game usually runs between 10-20 hours to be completed, and that's already the length of 1 or 2 seasons of a TV series on Netflix. Nonetheless, it's not uncommon to see video games of 100 or more hours, defeating with a 2-to-1 the colossal novels of the 19th century. Video games have already become the most durable narrative media existing. These two qualities, vastness and durability, are the reason for two common attributes in modern video games. The first is a complex character's web. As we all know, the character's web is an extension of the main character, and an intricate web means a more charismatic hero, a story strongly plot-driven, and an articulated theme. The second is a high conflict escalation. The narrator is induced to provide challenges more and more elaborate and difficult, since the player is acquiring the skills needed to overcome the obstacles that he has to face. As the player is evolving, the game has to evolve faster to entertain him. Technological evolution has introduced video games to the motion and facial capture, As we know, these technologies open the road to cinematography, acting performance, but furthermore to the star system. We have already seen video games with the faces and acting of stars like Ellen Page, Willem Dafoe, Mads Mikkelsen, and many others, more or less famous from movies and TV series. The AI has evolved, reaching horizons that only 10 years ago we wouldn't have hoped for. Management in massive dynamic groups of NPCs, vast environment areas afflicted by the PC's actions. But, most of all, artists now use the AI in creative ways that are transforming the same ludic experience. So far, we pointed out that the video game is a medium with video, temporal, virtual, private, and performance qualities. It can excel in vastness and durability, and therefore in developing a character's web and conflict escalation. It's highly cinematographic, and the ludic experience is evolving along with AI. These factors, all together though, still cannot answer if video games are a narrative tool or just a ludic one. Of course, we can count many narratological elements, and it's important to emphasize the evidence that clearly video games crave for these kinds of experiences, they covet for the narrative drive. Nevertheless, these narratological elements will never be enough if outcome of meaning and purpose isn't granted. In the 80s, video games too developed stories with multiple endings. Mostly it was about two ways, a dichotomy of good and evil, but soon it became even more complex. As we have seen, the multiple endings is maybe the strongest attribute in ludism. It provides to the player the promise of a more personal journey, and it also makes him responsible for the outcome. This means exerting interest and affection. Interest, from the Latin interesse, means to be inside. It's an insightful experience in the plot. Ad facere means to influence, because the virtual world is influenced by our choices and actions, and later we are influenced by the outcomes of those choices. A highly interesting and an effective narrative medium would be a remarkable tool. The problem is that these same attributes are the ones destabilizing the narrative revelation. But there might be a solution. In 2013, Beyond Two Souls was released. The game was a financial success and it won many awards. Nevertheless, it has been quite criticized in a lack of game experience. I agree with many others who believe that the controversy does not lay so much in the game mechanic. The game has a strong premise, psychological development, it's highly evidential, morally challenging, and yet utterly unsatisfying. In its closure, the game offers 8 different endings with 16 slight variants of them. But the player has absolute power when choosing which ending to follow, and the choice depends exclusively on the player's likes. One road or the other is simply the way we choose to cross, and it has no more meaning. Why no meaning? Because, as many critics have pointed out, all the efforts, all the choices, or at least most of them, that the player has done to reach that moment are now irrelevant. The meaninglessness of the final crossroads dries out the entire experience of its own sense. What have we come here for? Maybe the journey has been entertaining, but now it's all irrelevant. Let's now take a look on games like Heavy Rain and many others. These kinds of games also develop multiple endings, and sometimes the player has arbitrary access to more options. But what they differ in is that not all endings are equivalent. Especially, there is one that stands out in the crowd. We can perceive it quite immediately. Mostly when we are finished the game, we feel there's something odd, something that is unanswered. We are called to play the game again, and to do better because we feel there must be something more. And it is so. Some endings are more satisfying than others, but there is one ending, just one, that is capable of answering for the totality of the journey. Even more, some paths are designed specifically to show us why we shouldn't take them, to show what life could be when we take the wrong turn. What does this mean? That the revelation element is not betrayed, but actually even strengthened. We are not only responsible for the outcome of the story, but also to find the right one. We know well how in storytelling every journey is a call to adventure, and it's not unusual that the hero is reticent to take part in it. It's a call to the unknown, asking the hero to take a leap of faith. Well, in video games, we are now invested in this responsibility. To choose, as an audience, to be reticent or submissive to the narrator's plan. We can oppose to the narrator, establishing our individuality with rebellion, or we can consider the eventuality that the narrator has planned a better path for us for our journey, that we could discover our individuality in his design. In some ways, we can see how every game over plays the same dynamic. A game over is literally a game ending. Then, why don't we stop? Why trying again? Why continuing? Because this is not how it was meant to be. The end wasn't meaningful, and what we are reaching for is meaning. We are invited to play again and again to better ourselves. We are called to the best performance for the greatest transformation, because in good video games there is no gain without pain. Learning to be by doing. We discover ourselves through and because of our actions. We are invited to educate those actions to achieve the best outcome. The ending was good because we have done good. But also, it's like the fresh water fountain after a summer soccer match. We crave for it. And we deserved it. This, I believe, is the narrative power of video games.